I'm Sunshine. I'm the other half of Bloc Projects. There are two of us. I'm the curator. I'm the plant waterer, the billboard hanger, and we've been doing Harshlight for just under a year now. We started this program in September in the midst of the pandemic. Harshlight is a webinar series for art workers and publics to reflect on what it means to make and present art in these times. We host conversations that respond to the cultural, social, and political conditions that we find ourselves in at the moment. We invite speakers to share their experiences of keeping up, not keeping up with the chaos of life needs and ambitions or lack of ambitions at the moment, as the case may be, and contending with art infrastructures as well, most notably the Arts Council England, but not limited to them. So Harshlight is a chance for us to kind of take a collective temperature as a sector and to slow down a notch and to restore together as much as critique. I'll just quickly introduce our speakers tonight, who we're really, really pleased to have. We have Jade Montserrat, Dr. Cecilia Wee, and Michelle Williams Gamaker. Jade is an artist based in Scarborough, England. She works through performance, drawing, painting, film, installation, sculpture, print, and text. And Dr. Cecilia Wee is a London-based independent curator, educator, agitator, addressing equity, precarity, and infrastructures for art and social action, working with experimental sound, performance, and visual practices. And Michelle is an artist working in moving image. She interrogates cinematic artifice, deploying characters as fictional activists to critique the imperialist storytelling in 20th century British and Hollywood studio films. So together they co-wrote the essay, "We Need Collectivity Against Structural and Institutional Racism in the Cultural Sector," which was published around June last year, when many cultural institutions were making public declarations of anti-racist allyship in light of a growing Black Lives Matter movement in the UK. So our invitation actually came around that time, and it was just one amongst many, many responses they received in the wake of this text. So offers to help, offers to talk at events, and the like. So we're very pleased a year later, we finally got everyone together. And when we wondered what tonight's conversation could look like, we thought we could look back at this year to see what's happened since the text came out, and also with the input of the attendees, also look ahead to see how we can continue to work together, which was how the text ended as well. So also I wanted to add, this is obviously an evening webinar. All of us are at home. I've got my son outside, and everybody's got like kind of their domestic duties that they're half attending to, even as we're speakers and hosting this talk. So do excuse us if there are certain things, interferences, we hope you understand. So with no further ado, I'll just hand this over to Jade, Cecilia, and to Michelle. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunshine, and thank you, David. It's great to be here with you both and with everyone this evening. Thanks for being here, Cecilia and Michelle.
It's really good to be here. Just to clarify, you'll see a little hand from time to time. That's my baby who's being fed at the minute. So, but I'm present and with you all. I think I just wanted to say we haven't really seen each other for quite a long time, not only physically, but just we haven't been connecting very much. So it's going to be really good to reconnect in front of lots of people and to try to kind of unpack a little bit of last year and now.
Maybe it was quite deceptive, I suppose, the timing that it came out. It was urgent in light of George Floyd and protests and Black Lives Matter gaining traction as a movement around the world. And I think that that's what brought you on board, Cecilia, around that time. But you got in touch actually on that basis, whereby you said, are you still writing a text? Are you still pursuing that? So I think that it was very, it became very urgent for me to try and very quickly distill what I had been learning in a very short space of time around how to articulate how racism works, how structural racism it can be seen and discussed, and it took a long time to write, and I'm just really happy that it came, that we were able to dedicate. Well, actually, we were working with a certain amount of fire in our belly. Those early mornings that we did to be able to get that to a stage where it could be published and then meet a deadline. It wasn't, it was written, I think, on those last gasps of adrenaline before certain burnouts, I suppose, actually.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, you know, when I got in touch with you, Jade, then it was with the knowledge that you and quite a few other people were working on a text, or working on different versions. There were actually different, because I remember us looking at different versions of different texts that were in play. And then when the three of us got together, then we were still trying to figure out, like, what is this thing that we're doing together about, you know, what is this textual collaboration that's happening, and how many different versions. So we were talking about, like, you know, is there some kind of anthology? Is there some kind of like resource kit? And then, you know, how do we kind of like formulate that into something that's a lot more succinct? And then we had this idea to write this kind of like shorter text. And I feel like, yeah, that those breakfast dialogues were really important.
Yes, we set ourselves achievable goals or something. I remember that you were crucial with that, Cecilia, in that I think we had like a three-pronged viewpoint, and this was the first stage of that, actually.
Yeah, and if I remember, I'm just looking back over some notes, thanks to Cecilia coming in with the kind of editing skill, actually, which was needed because this document was really unruly. It, just to contextualize it, it was the work of many artists, most of whom were in connection with Jade. Jade and I would often meet. This was prior to this moment where the three of us met to kind of work on this document, but it was pages long. You know, it was this really long and necessary thing to communicate. So we ended up shaping the text around kind of three sections: a toxic environment, challenging legacies of whiteness, and a restructured cultural landscape. So that gave a kind of point of focus that we needed. And I think, of course, it could be much longer, what we wanted to write, but for the arts professional article, actually there was a strength in being succinct. And zoning in.
Yeah, I'm going to, I think this is his name, which I'm just writing to Max, sorry, because we had artists like Luke Willis Thompson that we were getting hooked up on for a while, and yeah, so those three sections was really useful in addressing what we needed to address, instead of actually trying to speak to an art world or artists direct, you know, like singling anything out. Because we avoided singling anything out. We were talking rather more generally about a lot of experiences, so that plurality of voices, even though people haven't been named. Tay, but there were, you know, dozens of others that had been part of the conversation at some point. Yeah. I mean, I haven't heard a great deal about Luke Willis Thompson recently, but I don't look out for his work. It was just very interesting that we were trying to describe our experiences through visual art and artists' examples, but then we were able to narrow down that it was working conditions, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that's really good that you say that, because it's true, that name has really disappeared. At least I've not. But I think when we wrote the text, correct me if I'm wrong, both of you, but one of the things that we said in the text, and I think that was something shared by us all, was this idea that we were being, specifically in light of BLM of last summer, because this is an ongoing movement. Basically, we were being continuously invited to share our vulnerabilities and pain, and within that came a good deal of exhaustion, because it is exhausting to have to do that, but also in that summer last year, where institutions were indeed scrambling to make good, or at least show that they were making good through, from our side, some of that was deeply performative, but you know, some institutions were doing some deeper work to kind of work out what change could be made. There was this need to try to kind of articulate how we could be employed, not to kind of serve an institution, but to be given the agency and the parity that we've asked for all along. So it was that was something at the crux of this text that was a driving motivation, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And we kind of, you know, after the text, it's funny because for me, like now I'm thinking about it, and I'm thinking also, like, it seems just like yesterday in some ways, but then it also seems like there's been a shift in terms of conversation. And I just wanted to kind of like explore that a bit, for us to explore that a bit. Like what's happened, or, you know, there were different phases of things that happened. So first there were these kind of performative statements, some of which, you know, we still continue to experience those things, or those things are still present in the cultural environment. And then then we started talking about, the three of us started talking about refusals as well, and how we were being asked or invited into certain spaces, and that's when we kind of we were working together also with Susan Butler to produce this kind of little I guess tool, a mini tool to think about what refusal could look like, or why one might interrogate or ask questions about invitations. And then, yeah, here we are.
Yeah, we tried refusal, but I have a question to both of you, because I think, you know, we know each other informally too in this kind of friendship network that we're part of. To what degree did you manage, after we made the toolkit, did you listen to your own medicine or listen to your own advice? Because I suppose I'm not very good at actually refusing, and I have felt, despite co-writing the article, it has, as almost predicted, become this kind of rapacious need for our labour. And I know it from just looking at your online profiles, how very busy you are. And I know that there's a good level of total commitment and care to wanting to make changes. But how have you both been managing in the past, you know, maybe the last year is too much to talk about, but recently with invitations and refusal?
So I was interested initially in the idea of refusal when I read an article by Morgan Quaintance, maybe in 2018. And what struck, it must have been 2017 or 16. But what struck me was how difficult it is to do that. So my argument is that unless there are certain conditions, it is aligned with something that you flagged up, Cecilia, which was about appeasement. But also, I'm pleased to say that, you know, my Instagram account that you're referring to is mostly filled with commitments and work that I didn't imagine that I would have these opportunities. These are great opportunities. And so my refusals, I hope, are stealthier and something that I'm trying to implement as foundational, rather than sort of flat out no's or yeses, that they're aligned with the work that you've attended as well so far. We've had one meeting, the Gender meeting, Global Black and Ethnic Majorities Board Members Association. So that, for me, is quite personal, in as much as I had resigned from the board that I was on, Crescent Arts in Scarborough, due to racism and their sort of access to be able, or being able to function on that board. So I'm hopefully, now that there's a whole new management and committee and director, going back onto that board, but I wouldn't be able to do it perhaps without having a network now of people who are in similar, positions to myself, precarious, unpaid, as a board member, and but also passionate and dedicated, committed to that role. So I think that I'm also my sense of obligation, or being sort of in parts what's the word, where you feel like, well, obligated, I suppose, is the best word for it. I'm sort of weaning myself off that, and it's making me maybe a bit hard-edged. I can feel it in some of my correspondences, and also I felt it in my fingers physically recently, because I think that I am bashing out. It has been noted on trains before, actually. And I think I'm going to have to do something about it, because my fingers have started to hurt. So it's been a question of refusing, for me personally, refusing feeling like those moments of appeasement or obligation, I'm trying to just distance myself from.
Right, yeah, that's so interesting, Jade, because and we were talking about, I'll try and find the article about appeasement that we were talking about as well.
Almost daily, that article.
You look at it all the time. It's a great article. I think I have it. Yeah. I feel like I have, similarly, I feel like the no's and the refusals, or the decisions not to participate in things, have been foundational, in the sense that it's a recognition of actually not overworking, which is a really, really simple thing to say, but then as someone who works freelance and as a precarious worker in higher education as well, I think that is always, this uncertainty around the future is always looming to a certain extent. And I think we've all talked about the pressures. We've talked about the pressures quite a lot, actually, of taking things or not taking things up. And I feel really lucky, in the sense that this year I got Claw Fellowship, so I can actually feel like I can take a bit of a decision and think strategically about what I actually want to put my efforts into, and say no to the gigs that I feel won't feed me. And I think it was really, I had some words with myself to try and actually say I'm only gonna participate in the things where I think it will bring me some opportunity and actually enjoyment. And so, my fingers feel okay about that, actually.
We're gonna look after your fingers, Jade.
Yes, exactly. We have to do some finger kind of like massaging.
I need to stop typing.
I like what you said about participating in things that, you know, give you joy, you know, the opportunity bring. Obviously, I think that's a good place to be, you know, like that's it, very important. I think there's an interesting thing that happens when you are perhaps, I wonder what it's like in different institutions, like a kind of Rolodex of people that they could call upon. Sorry, Ren is crying. Like there's a part of me that has replied to say, you know, I'm not the only person you can call upon. You know, I think that there have been big moments of neglect of individuals. In our article, we spoke about, I just want to send this to Vicky. We spoke about Evan Ifakoya at Goldsmiths, who withdrew their labour. And that was something that we spoke about in relation to Evan needing to do that with regard to structural racism and anti-blackness, and you know, a kind of the endurance involved in being part of surviving an institution. Now Evan still has not received an apology, and whenever I accept work, I do have to think about who gets remembered and who doesn't, and I find that a very, you know, within our friend network, our friendship network, our collaborating network, I think we can always check in on one another. I know that Cecilia and I have had to do that with other institutions where I might have received an invitation and that would actually potentially undo the work of Cecilia. So this is a really interesting thing around how we might be being played off one another, that I think that many artists in our position may know. So yeah, it's just, I'm just very aware that we, while some of us may find themselves in demand, that is a kind of fleeting moment, because we'll be as equally scrapped at the next wave of need. So it's sort of it's something that I think if we think about what has gone on in the last year, how much have we seen shifts or movement in the right direction?
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
wonder about boundary making as well. Yeah, I think, sorry, what were you going to say, Cecilia?
I was going to say something. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who's a choreographer, and yeah, an amazing Black disabled choreographer in America, Barak Adesoleil, and we were talking about being the POC unicorn, the person of color unicorn, and I was just sort of thinking of that that image of the unicorn in relation to a sort of like disposability, or like the you know, how we've talked about there isn't necessarily room for all of us, and how that mindset needs to be shifted.
Hi, so we're back again. I was just thinking during the break how interesting it has been to hear about the different stages that the writing went through. Because I guess when you read a text, you have no idea, as from a reader's perspective, the kinds of work that went on to make it, to create it. So to hear that to hear things like it took many breakfast meetings, you know, that it was almost an anthology or a toolkit is so interesting. And beyond that, that this is also the first proper conversation that you've had about the text. Well, not really about the text, but about the process of writing it, reflecting on it. We do feel super honored to be hosting this. I guess it's not really a question, but just thinking about like the refusals that you've been speaking about, and structural changes. Yeah, I guess refusal, the way you've been describing it, it's been kind of from your personal, from your personal perspectives, the ways you've been trying to refuse and the circumstances of refusal. Is this something that could be a starting off point in thinking about the shape of collectivity, like the collective refusal, perhaps? Because I think that was one of the main questions that was kind of hovering over this conversation when we were putting it together. What all these sort of approaches that people, all these invitations to speak or desire to want to help, even not really having a home for it or a real way of funneling all of these energies, I suppose. And in the first half of this conversation, it's kind of encrusting around this notion of refusal. I wonder if this is something that could be kind of tied into this conversation of sharing ownership of structural change. But these are just thoughts. It's not something you have to answer. But I thought that this is just one way of reintroducing and channeling our conversation for the second part. So I'm just going to leave it there.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to that, if that's okay.
Yeah.
In terms of, because it's quite difficult to talk about refusal. Like I am, again, personally, a part of the problem, obviously. I want to get out of the predicament that I'm currently in personally, and I need financial support for that. I need finances, I need mobility, it's a socially sort of narrative that's very similar to and so that I am hypocritical in lots of respects, and I don't know how. I mean, sort of the sort of discomfort that's brought about through trying to work in education in certain organizations. It has an impact on the work one does, and actually without addressing the structural problems, sort of confronting them head on, I don't know how to practice collective refusal unless the sort of structure is there to support me, because that we're working under collectively, us three and our wider network work on a sort of idea of mutual aid to an extent, but it stops to another extent with us, apart from what we then go on to extend outwards as best we can. But I'm under no illusions that what we're trying to do is actually imagine a different context, as opposed to being able to, because, you know, even by discussing claw, there's a sort of cloud there when we talk about goldsmiths, there's another, Ruskin, for me, and I don't personally, again, have the language even to, or I'm equipped with all the training I need to be able to identify what I'm actually going through in terms of contracts and stuff. You know, I need to eat, so need to now feed my dog, and those kind of just everyday things. So it is something about a shift and a collectivity, but I don't know. I have always been dubious about this idea of refusal. I think that there are other routes to get to where we need, but I don't know. I don't know.
I guess it's not as easy as refusing, because like you, Jade, interestingly, during what was meant to be maternity leave that kind of got decimated by a number of things, including, of course, what happened with the pandemic that we're in, I found myself reducing my contract at Goldsmiths, but then taking on all the freelance work to meet the shortfall. And in so doing, that's just a basic thing around paying the bills and surviving, as well as obviously this point, very crucial point that Cecilia raises, that hopefully the things that we say yes to bring joy and are also not stretching us in ways that seem to take us out of what we're trying to work towards. And sometimes I have in the past found myself saying yes to things because the need for financial support tops the need for choosing what I need for myself. And now that's, you know, I think coming back to this idea that Sunshine's asked us to think about collective refusal or any form of collectivity, I think we're still potentially in a space where we're still quite atomized, and it's when asked or invited to things, it's only through the networks that we're building that we can check in with one another through this form of mutual aid, as you say, Jade, that allows us to potentially build some network of solidarity to counter the individual invitation, because I think the institution still thrives and survives on the basis of individualism and our atomization as artists and arts workers. So I think that there's still a lot of work needing to be done to stop the division or the competition amongst us, which I think is also completely problematic. And I'm not quite sure how we get around that, but it comes back to my point about who's being invited and who isn't. You know, 2 years ago I had a dreadful year, and last year I didn't have a dreadful year. And what's, you know, what is that shift? And I know as an artist, which is a precarious profession, years fluctuate and we win and we lose depending on multiple political reasons. So I think that yeah, I'm just trying to keep that in mind.
I guess like one of the things that I think about, and I completely agree with everything that you've both said, because I guess like it's one of the things that we also have been speaking about over the course of us meeting up and talking and thinking about, like, yeah, different relationships between institutions and the different types of affinities that we want to build with each other and other people who find themselves in a similar situation as well. And I guess one of the questions that we did ask ourselves that we wanted to think about was, yeah, what does it mean for institutions to turn to artists for the answers? And just thinking about this idea of friction within the structures, that currently exist, and the potentials for change, and I guess I think about, you know, so going back to what Sunshine kind of like started with, which was a bit in both in our invitation when Sunshine wrote to us about, you know, thinking about the Arts Council context and all of those sorts of things. Then I do also think about, like, you know, the Cultural Recovery Fund, for example, and how there's been a lot of emphasis on equality, diversity, inclusion work within that. Like, lots of people got money to do those projects, to do those pieces of work, and that's all happening in this period of time. So this year, which is, you know, which kind of reflects this fluctuation that you're referring to, I think, Michelle, of like, maybe this is a great year to be a ethnically diverse person, but then what happens like next year or the next year? And that's one of the big things, that, like, you know, there's this uncertainty of how long, what happens to this moment, or like, how is this moment continued within certain structures that exist. And, you know, I have big questions about, like, you know, I see that there are organizations or institutions that maybe do have the capacity to change. There's others that will find it really difficult, and, you know, maybe I don't really care about those places anymore. Maybe they can like, they even need to be publicly funded anymore. All of those things. And actually that money or support, whether it's public or not, let's just say it's just money, that support and money can go to a different place and go to somewhere a lot more exciting. So, you know, like, I think about the work that different groups and other organizations have been doing, and, like, for example, the work of Healing Justice London, or like the work of Migrants and Culture, or like, you know, there's all of these different groups and networks, and actually they're building new institutions, or maybe anti-institutions. You're muted, Michelle.
So sorry. There's a question in the chat that we should attend to regarding, at the end of our article, we called for people to get in touch with us. And the question is have you built a network of people who are in solidarity with the messages in the article? I think we should touch upon that, because indeed we did receive many emails to our collective inbox. But yeah, we should maybe just speak about how we began. Yeah, please, Jade. Yeah.
We put in for the funding to facilitate that kind of work. That went in yesterday, didn't it? Our first, or maybe we've put in for funding previously, but actually capacities are limited to be able to sort of attend to admin, that kind of, I don't think we set out, I don't think there was any expectation that we'd sort of, I mean, a time scale in, you know, people getting in touch, but it's fantastic that, I think it's that we have been careful, a thoughtful approach, I hope, but it's just not speedy. And also the Instagram account, I suppose, again, we've not been like inundating anyone with a load of content. I think that there's maybe 2 posts, but that shows the support. I think that there's a sensitivity around it as well. There's also, we're also, yeah, I think that it requires a sensitivity that takes time, and we haven't had that much time to regroup. Even though it's a year, it doesn't feel like a year or something. In terms of the fluctuations of energy, everything seems urgent all the time, and we want the commitment, I suppose. So we're building commitment between ourselves, but I think for the CHEAD, the CHEAD conference, that again, it's like building momentum. So when I spoke at that, we were able to regroup, to discuss, but to be able to actually spend time compiling that database that and I think all of us are kind of again desperate for. It's sort of focusing a lot, like when I suppose people get together to do Wikipedia entries and stuff like that. It would require dedicated data entry basically, and then letters and sort of refining what it is that we're trying to do as artists. And that's the sensitivity as well, who we're speaking for, because we haven't even regrouped with everyone who has had a bearing on that text.
I think you made a really important point. You know, as artists, we express something that was lived, and you know, and so as arts workers, we express something that was lived, and we did it because we were not only passionate, but we had to say what we had to say. There was like this absolute need to speak out. But then as artists, to then have to take on the administration of it, I think I feel like it was really important to declare what we said, because we tried to speak from our collective personal spaces, but indeed to kind of do the deeper work of finding the funding, sharing the load, so that it doesn't just sit on our shoulders, but potentially can be taken up by others, is the place that we're at now. You know, I think one year has gone by, but we couldn't have foreseen how our words would be received by others. From the emails that we received, they were really important words that were taken by others, and I think that they touched people in the way that when you read something and it resonates. So that was a really important connection in terms of trying to make new connections, but in truth, the three of us just didn't have the capacities or energies at the time to attend to each email, and at a certain point we understood that, and that was okay. But I do hope that the text which circulates brings people to our work, but also to their own work within institutions and spaces.
I think there's hours, is there, sorry, on the email, on the Gmail, like an out of hours reply.
That's right. Yeah.
But I think you know, Michelle, you brought up a really important point, which is really that, like, it took us time to come to that realization that actually we couldn't, because I remember at one point we were sort of like scrambling around replying and then we realized that it wasn't going to work, and then we were okay with that, and then and actually I feel like even though we haven't been overproductive, let's say, we haven't been overly productive, that there is a sense of us kind of like working together, or like there's, I feel like there's still, you know, there's still this commitment to work together on something, whatever it may be, and you know, we are there is a collectivity in terms of the checking in and the perspectives, and something that is shared, and you know, we're talking about like the funding application, or the application for something or other, which may or may not develop in time, but I think that something will develop, and yeah, I feel like it's important to also just kind of spend time together. That's kind of where I'm, what I think is, you know, yeah, I think we're all kind of missing that, and there is this sense of yeah, everything has to happen urgently all the time, but actually one of the most important things that we need is time together. I am so full of platitudes today. I'm so sorry, everyone. I'm so sorry, Jade and Michelle.
Don't be sorry. That's fine.
Gosh.
I don't know. I mean, ultimately, it's almost like a question of what came first. You know, the need for the text came at a point in time that also coincided with a pandemic, which then ruptured or fractured all of us, in the sense that we just couldn't connect. We could connect digitally, but we lost the capacity to see one another. I mean, Jade, I took it for granted, would come to my house and stay with me, you know, and that was, I really kick myself for, you know, not seeing you that last time, because then I haven't been able to for over a year. And I've, you know, those sorts of things are just so unforeseen in, you know, and now it does feel like there's a potential for recovery, and there's a potential, I think we learn, I think through, I think I do anyway, just like sometimes I blurt something out, and then I have to kind of do the work of kind of meeting my passion, or my, you know, non-thinking, like I've got to say, I've got to work to kind of meet that burst of expression. And then similarly, we wrote a text, it was kind of unleashed into the world. Many institutions also contacted us, not just individual artists, and we had some strange meetings actually with one or two where it didn't go anywhere, perhaps because of the fractured nature of the pandemic. But we all, many people reached out because people could feel the need, but we now have to do this thing of slow work to even begin to work through what we said. And I think that I really loved, Cecilia, that you said we haven't been overproductive and we haven't like bombarded our Instagram account, but isn't that already a wonderful sign that, you know, we may have formed a collective, but we're now working with, you know, that was just, we've had 2 outputs on our Instagram account, and they're significant and meaningful, but they're not excessive, because maybe we can just manage two, but they're, you know, but they're distilled and they're good.
I really felt that the time that we spent writing the text, I loved it, but I was running on empty. So I feel like I can sit back for a little while. No, but honestly, it was quite a lot to draw that together. But like you say, Michelle, I think that there's significant, it's significant work, and it's clearly for however frustrating I find it, as a really impatient person. And actually, I'm beginning to wonder whether that's the case. Actually, I think, yeah, it's just some things are so difficult to shift that it feels like, oh, one is supposed to be more patient, but actually, yeah, that's the dilemma, I suppose, is how to manage the expectation as well, because what's achievable. But on that, when we got together for me to be able to make the talk for the Jade conference, and that's going to be published in Lumen Press. So again, there's a, you know, everything is leading to another thing, at least.
Hi everybody, I'm popping back in to the discussion, which has been tremendous. It's really, really fascinating discussion. What I wanted to do now was, if I could, was to just bring in some of the questions that have come up. And there was one from JJ, which touches on something that we've been discussing, or you've been discussing at length, I guess, which is about that contradiction between a public role and a private, albeit a collective, urgency, and how you negotiate those contradictory modes. So I wondered if there's any thoughts you might have on that. So I'll just kind of briefly read out some of what JJ was asking.
Yes,
around those kind of two forms of urgency. Firstly, the sense of urgency amongst ourselves for some kind of change. And secondly, the confrontation with another kind of urgency, which is coming from our institutions, or those that are the voices of institutions, who display an urgency to move past this moment of a very specific kind of public scrutiny, which I guess is referring to the performative aspect of what happened in response to Black Lives Matter. But that urgency that institutions might have to retreat from the public and back into the boardroom, which I guess also refers to, Yuan had a question about that institutional change and whether you perceive there to be any institutional change occurring.
Yeah, I think they're huge questions, and thank you, JJ, for your question, especially like in some ways. So when we were preparing for this talk, like one of the things that we mentioned was this idea of like, yeah, what does it mean to reopen, and there being this kind of like hiatus in activity, you know, since March 2020. There's been several waves of hiatuses, and then now we kind of retransition back into something, but in some ways it's too early to tell. Like I feel like in some ways it's too early to tell, like to what extent those changes that have been declared will be committed to, and to what extent, and how those institutions will relate to that when we go back in face to face, when we are in physical space, because I feel like there is a sense of escape that's possible at the moment.
Do you mean, can I ask you, Cecilia, do you mean, and I think I get it, when you mean an escape, it's because we're not face to face and that we can protect ourselves? I totally agree, because there's...
But actually the institutions can protect themselves as well.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's the flip side of that, totally. In a way, that in that scrutiny or that intensity of being with people, I don't know about the two of you, but I have really welcomed, actually, to use a term from the pandemic, shielding myself from some institutions and some people. So it's going to be an interesting test, actually, on both sides.
I saw another question that was for me that was earlier from Elin. Are Claw looking at leadership in terms of alternative governance models yet? I think that is still yet to be seen, but it is being discussed, as in, like, it is being present, it is being raised in the room. So we shall see. I think as we mentioned earlier, like, there is a cloud of Claw, and I'm very happy to, like, be a fellow for this year and participate in that. But actually it's a structure that is part also of this is part of all of the structures that we're critiquing and interrogating.
I don't know where David's gone, so I'm just popping on. Ah, there he is.
I thought that was a very interesting point that Fiona was just making about that process of slow accretion. I guess when we think of institutional change, we would like there to be swift or cataclysmic or really dramatic change. But of course, the reality is that rarely happens, and actually this process of slow accretion might be more likely to get us to a different place.
Yeah, actually, though, on that, we discussed this when we came together when I was preparing for that talk, and we were talking also about people at sort of the top. There could be that cataclysmic change if, like was suggested for others during the pandemic, about retraining, stepping aside, and allowing others to organise the general arrangements. We did discuss that, didn't we? In light of that, I'm just talking maybe that there is that sort of musicality that could, we could imagine that there are crescendos, but they're, a leitmotif over here, and then, that there's pattering. I don't know. I need to get myself some sort of keyboard with effects. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, we did say in the text, we are not leaving. It's your turn to move aside. I mean, that was a very clear statement uttered. Ben was asking, can you suggest any more ways to care for ourselves, but also for others, with this idea of shielding as a way of coping? But I mean, I don't know how to link those two things, but slowing down certainly is an important mechanism in that, because maybe if we think back to that kind of knee-jerk reaction from the institutions to make themselves feel better, or to certainly look better, or to make up for time lost, that the quickness of those requests were not really that thought out. So
if we think about
if we
Evan,
who slow down, maybe that's a good thing in the general slowing down that we all need to do.
I just, when perhaps trauma is in play, and you mentioned Evan Efakoya, in that instance, we don't want to see slow. We want, it's quite easy and proper to issue an apology. And so what's all that slow business?
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, well, that's so slow that it's inaction. Yeah.
Inaction, yes, yes. Oh, I see the difference. Absolutely. So it just feels prolonged, because actually it's like a gaslighting, where there's the process going on, but it's actually in action, whereas we're talking about slowing down as care, as a breathing, as recognizing that it's not as abrupt as a refusal, but it's implementing a way of living that isn't addressing other people's demands and expectations. Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks, Jade, for saying it that way. Yeah. That's why it's so good to work with people you trust. I think that's been one of the loveliest. No, this is not meant to be a platitude either. But I mean, this is really an important moment where someone can take what you say and then reframe it, or give it additional context, or add additional knowledge. Because I feel that's what I've received from the two of you, is in moments where I have a kind of felt knowledge, or it's not backed up with enough reading, or it's not, you know, you've seen a text and you can bring it to our attention, Cecilia, or, you know, like it just continues to be a huge resource that I think Goswin, hello, you had mentioned, can't we as artists, you know, collectivize, and, you know, that could be a radical gesture that we do, so long as you can find these networks of people that you trust. I think collectives could also be collectives plural, you know. I don't think it's too hard. I think we're too huge, you know, and we've got too many different needs, but there's definitely groupings that can strengthen your space and place in whatever this art world might be.
Yeah, I think that idea of different groupings and participating in multiple groupings has been really important. And actually that's one of the things that, like, our grouping has taught me, because we've also, like, as a group, we've talked about, like, our experiences in higher education. And Michelle, you've talked about your experience at Goldsmiths, and I've talked about my experience at Royal College of Art, and all of the work that we've been doing with the union to address the Royal College of Art's institutional racism, and how that is also part of, like, another network of different, well, there's multiple networks at play there across the country, and yeah.
I think we've come to a little decrescendo, which makes it quite a nice time for us to maybe bring this to a close. It is already a little bit past 8:30, and also in light of what was mentioned in the Q&A about slowness, about taking things down a notch, it's probably that time of day as well. That's we all need to replenish ourselves and do a little bit of self-care as well. So thank you so much. Yeah, go on, Cecilia.
I just wanted to note that like the chat is abundant, actually. Thank you everyone for all of your comments, and yeah, thanks JJ for the thing that you just mentioned, like what do you say to someone who comes to the letter naive and previously unaware, and then says, what can I do to help? How can I help? That is the subject of many emails in my inbox, and I'm always so sorry not to reply. Yes.
Yeah. There has been so many amazing comments in the chat. We will be saving them, by the way, for our speakers. So we'll be forwarding them to you to keep that as a record. But yeah, apologies if we couldn't get to your question. It's just, yeah, we're just mindful of the time that we're taking up of everyone, but hopefully we addressed some of the key concerns. And yeah, thank you again to our speakers. Thank you all the attendees for taking time out today to join us. And I hope you all have a lovely evening. I'm going to ask that the speakers and our signers stick around just for 5 minutes, and so I can check in with you. We can check in with each other. And to everyone else, have a good night.
Thanks. Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye. Good night.